I'm Steve. I'm the owner of Aquarium Zen. We've been here for 10 years now. This coming on our 11th year, and my goal has been to bring the art of the planted aquarium to the Seattle community. That was my intention of opening this space, and it's been a really fun journey for me over the years. Today's talk, the theme would be, it's going to be getting started. So often what I do is ask for questions from the crowd, and I'll weave your answers into the overall theme. So it's kind of a fun challenge for me to answer your questions, but also stay on target with our topic. So our topic is getting started. Where to get started with the Aquascape, my approach to it, and we'll just kind of work from layer to layer on how to develop one of these beautiful ecosystems. We'll use the tank behind me as kind of a teacher, kind of a training tool, taking examples from this beautiful aquarium here. This is, this tank's been going for about a year or so. And it's been quite a journey with this one, as I'll discuss. When I get started with an aquascape, there's usually some like point of inspiration that's kind of driving me, that's directing the whole progression of the tank. In this aquarium, my goal is to have a very densely planted aquarium because I wanted to experiment with some colors, some rare plants, some colorful rare plants, and the sort of companion textures and plants to support those. A lot of rare plants can be challenging to grow. This one in particular is quite rare and has been a challenge for me. It's a variegated form of Rotella macrandra that requires a lot of care. It's not a naturally occurring form of that plant. It has I believe it has a virus that kind of keeps it sort of weak. So it needs all the bells and whistles to support its growth. It needs very bright lighting. It needs a soil-based substrate. It needs injected carbon dioxide and a consistent fertilizer strategy. So it kind of needs a lot of care. But by using this plant as my focal point, my target, a lot of these other plants will fall under that umbrella of care and do quite well. So that's kind of the goal. So that was the goal at this tank. And also I wanted to have a big school of these red cherry tetras and have them breed. So by having a dense planting of stem plants, I would also have the nursery habitat to support baby tetras. So that's all worked out. I started with around 20 tetras, and there's probably about 60 in there now. So every week I'll see like 1 or 2 new babies, and they mostly hide out in the thick groves of plants, and then as they get a little more secure, usually about 1/4 of an inch long, they'll rejoin the whole family and add to the mix of the school. So that's been a successful mission, so to speak, with this aquarium. The plantings have been a struggle, and a lot of the struggles come down to how I started this aquarium. When I started this aquarium, the previous layout, I had taken the tank down to the glass and just kind of emptied the whole thing and was ready for a new design. And I started working on the new design, and then I got really busy. Just like some life stuff came up. There's like kind of some turmoil with my staffing here in the shop, and I couldn't tend to the aquarium, couldn't give it the focus that it needed in those early stages. Early stages are probably the most delicate, probably the most important in the whole lifespan of the aquarium, the whole trajectory of the development of the aquascape, in my opinion. So what happened, one specific problem was I had gotten as far as laying out the substrate. This is the ADA Amazonia aqua soil. That's the one I'm using in this tank. It's a kind of rice paddy clay that's been formed into a little ball, and I believe sun-baked. So it looks like gravel, but it's actually mud in a little ball form. It's very fragile, actually. It's very delicate. So I had gotten as far as laying out the substrate, put in some hardscape, and then chaos came into my life for like a month or two. And what happened in that time is I let the soil dry out. The soil, as I said, it's a fragile material, and it needs to be kept with a considerable amount of moisture. You know, they're packed in these plastic bags that contain moisture and keep it kind of hydrated. And so during that period of turmoil, I didn't get to tend to this aquarium at all, and the water level just kind of naturally evaporated out of the soil, and it started drying out. When it starts drying out, it starts losing its integrity, and it starts getting powdery. It starts kind of reverting to its base form of just like powdered clay, essentially. And I knew that restarting it, that could be a problem, but I was like, I'm just going to move forward anyways and see what happens. And I've been struggling with it ever since, because when the soil loses its sort of structural integrity and you reconstitute the tank with water, those fine particles start getting into the system, into solution, into the water column, and they land on your hardscape, they land on the leaf surfaces, and they're little trigger points for algae. So I've had a lot of algae issues in this tank over the course of its lifespan. Most notably on the hardscape, I get some black brush algae on the hardscape, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's just that first few weeks where I lost my focus, had to, life drew me elsewhere, and I couldn't tend to the aquarium. So that's a really important thing to think about. When you're starting an aquarium, you want to make sure you're going to have the time, you're going to have the focus to really give the attention that it needs to start it off properly. Because once it's started, and it's going off on some trajectory that you're not always in control of. So it's nice to have some control over those key pieces like the substrate or lighting, whatever, from the get-go, and you'll be more successful in the long term. So that was something I knew going into was going to be a challenge, but I didn't want to, it's the soil's quite expensive, honestly. There are a few $100s worth of dirt there, and I just didn't want to throw it away, and wanted to learn something as well to see if I could maybe beat the odds and make a beautiful tank regardless. And it has been a beautiful tank, and it's been successful with raising the tetras, and I've gotten a lot of joy out of this despite its difficulties, because it has had a lot more algae than I'm comfortable with, and that's okay too. It's just, you just kind of got to roll with it sometimes. And so that's the story there of how excuse me, how this tank started out. Yeah, like I said, it's been going for about a year now, and mostly it functions as a kind of stem plant nursery. It's just growing a lot of plant material. I'll pull out, a pound of plants every week from this tank. It's got very bright lighting, carbon dioxide, soil. It's getting fertilized regularly. As I said in the beginning, one of my goals was to grow some rare plants, some delicate plants, but to support the whole ecosystem that I'm designing, I also have fast-growing plants as well. If it was just like pure, slow-growing, difficult plants, it wouldn't function as well as an ecosystem. So we're really designing an ecosystem, and we want to have all those different players in place that are going to support the ecosystem. Just like when you walk into a forest, you may see like an old-growth tree. It's been there 1,000 years. It doesn't seem to be growing much, but then you have all these understory herbs and weeds that are growing very quickly. They're annuals. So there's all these different players that have different sort of metabolic rates in their growth, and they're all important in supporting this function. So I find I have an ecology background. That's what I studied in college. So I find learning about nature, learning about ecology, biology is really important. Has been important in my journey. I consider these kind of a science experiment, but also, you know, an artistic project too. So you're using both art and science to create these beautiful fish tanks, which is, it's wonderful. And I find that is very balancing for me, and that's where the Zen comes in, because I'm, you know, using my full capacity of my brain to, you know, intellectually solve problems and then intuitively create beauty. So it's very satisfying for me. I'll pause there for any questions, if anyone.
How in the heck are you controlling algae growth in this thing?
How am I controlling?
Like, I don't see shrimp, I don't see snails.
Yeah, so one of the problems with, or not problems, one of the challenges with trying to breed the tetras was I couldn't use a lot of shrimps, because the shrimps will eat the fish eggs. They can really smell the eggs. So there are a few shrimp in there, but they're not a lot. So that's an issue. So I don't have a lot of support of the, you know, typical algae eaters, you know, the cleanup crew that the sort of sanitation department of the aquarium that we normally use in this case. So it's a little more of a challenge. So I'm doing the work.
Yeah, you're manually scraping and cleaning.
Yeah, so I have to come in, there's a little scraper tool that I have that this company Aqua Design Amano actually makes, where it just plucks off the black brush algae off the rocks. So I go through periodically and just like a dental assistant, just like cleaning the rocks.
You could probably hire dental assistants to come.
They'd probably do much.
Internship.
Yeah, they'd probably do a better job than me. So yeah, it's a lot of manual labor on this one, and it's getting to the point where I'm like, I don't really know if I have that kind of energy for it anymore. It's been like a year, and I kind of want something more sustainable. So I'm going to be traveling a bit at the end of May. So probably when I come back, I'm going to restart this tank with the more sustainable design. Probably more hardscape focused. I like to do a lot of emergent hardscape. So I'll do some emergent hardscape, which will screen some of the intensity of the lighting. Because when you have lights like this, these aren't adjustable in any way. This is the first version of this light. The only way they can be dimmed, so to speak, is by raising them. And so they're not that easy to work with. You kind of have like a one setting function to deal with, and they're quite bright. So when you have that level of brightness, you have to accommodate it. You know, you're overdriving this system with energy, light energy, and you have to do something with that, or else algae will step in. You're creating a niche for something to grow in, and if you don't fill that niche intentionally with plants that can, you know, have accelerated plant growth to sort of absorb that energy, then algae will step in.
Do you have issues with this seasonally?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
that
never.
Amount of light.
That amount of light.
Your windows might
Yeah, Windows a little different, but I find the skylight for some reason hasn't really affected this tank.
Diffuse.
Yeah, it's quite diffuse. This tank's been here about 12 years now, this exact tank. It's gone through many permutations over the years. About every couple years, I start over with the new design. So it's kind of due. It's a little early. You know, it'd be nice if I could get another year out of it. But I succeeded in growing up a nice school of the red tetras, so I'm proud of that. My journey with this delicate plant feels like it's coming to a close. It's too finicky. It's so finicky. One of my tricks is if I'm having algae issues, I'll turn off the lights for a day. And so just a blackout period is what people call it. So I gave this tank a blackout period of like a day, and came back, and this plant had been growing beautifully. It's bright pink. Just one day of a blackout, it started turning yellow except the growing tip, where everything else was completely fine. So shows you how delicate that plant is. Yeah. So, but you know, it's good to challenge yourself as well. But it just got me back to my reminder of what my style is more about. It's more about sustainability. This whole store is my ecosystem. You know, not only the fish tanks, it's the community that come through here, my staff. There's a lot going on that I'm managing, and I can't devote you know, 2 or 3 hours of my precious time to just this one aquarium every week, sadly. And that, you know, you find those folks that have these really dialed in, hardscape driven, you know, aquascapes, you know, some of them are competitive, they enter them in competitions. They're putting a lot of energy into just one tank, and they do require that. Some of them will do like daily water changes, you know, for example. So this tank gets like weekly water changes, and that's all I can really, that's all the time I can really devote to it. So.
You got a charger for this? It's throwing a low battery.
Oh, is it? That's okay. Yeah.
So I got a question. So in thinking of the tank as an ecosystem, which is how I like to think of mine, how do you foster the presence of microfauna? So like I have CPDs and chili rasboras, they're micropredators. I had a nice population of copepods, but I think it's depleted. So like, how do I keep that going at a sustainable level?
So with the planted aquarium, they're, you know, I call it an ecosystem, but in a way it's a very simplified ecosystem. So in terms of supporting microfauna, it may not be the best approach if that's your goal. If that's your goal, you probably want to take what's more of like a biotope botanical style, where you're adding leaves and like seed pods and things like that. Those are going to support more of a rich little microfauna for your fish fry and that kind of thing. So that's been really popular lately. Last few years, that's gaining a lot more popularity, where people are taking like tropical leaf litter, you know, like Indian almond leaves, mango leaves, banana leaves, guava leaves, all these different styles. We sell a bunch of those products here if you're interested. And like little seed pods from tropical trees, and adding them to their aquarium. And that decomposition that you're getting from all those leaves and botanicals is supporting little microorganisms in a.
So when you go to Hawaii, are you dragging back a duffel bag of just like the stuff off? Like,
No,
like
no. I wish I had time for that. I'm more hanging out on the beach.
But theoretically,
Yeah.
like, I mean,
That's the zen,
yeah.
right
Yeah.
there.
I thought about doing that, but you know, it's the there are people in like Indonesia who've been doing that for years, and they're very efficient at accumulating those things and cleaning them and processing them. Yeah, yeah. So I just kind of trust them to do. You know, they're professionals with that kind of work, and sometimes it's good just to leave it to the professionals.
Imagine getting stopped by TSA for a bag full of weird
Yeah, and you have to be careful. There's you know, all sorts of organisms, centipedes and things. You know, it's not that much fun. So no, that's not my vibe. Collecting, you know, massive amounts of leaf litter, but there are people out there doing that, and so you could support them with their products, and it's probably a good thing. But yeah, there's obviously some kind of microfauna happening in there, because the tetras are microscopic when they're born. So they're eating something. I'm not really feeding infusoria or rotifers or anything like that. So there's clearly something happening there. But I would say if your goal is to really amplify the microfauna, look to that botanical approach. Yeah. Were there any other questions?
I have one. I mean,
Yes.
you mentioned that this tank has been really high maintenance for you, which
Yes.
you kind of knew going in, but you're
Yeah.
worn out now.
Yeah.
And that you're starting a more sustainable tank now.
Mhm.
What are kind of like the pillars that are important to keep in mind for someone who's really trying to start up a new tank that will require minimal daily or weekly maintenance?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Okay, yeah, so let's walk through the start to sort of finish with starting one of these aquascapes, and with the intention of creating something that's sort of sustainable, so it's not too much work for us. So the first thing is, you know, getting your tech in place. I often see people kind of piece things together over time, and then that could create some struggles down the line. So making sure you have some quality lighting, that's really important. If you're going to do a lot of plants like this, a soil-based substrate, good filtration. I'm using 2 quite large canister filters on this aquarium, so it's overpowered with filtration, and that's pretty important. CO2, I have CO2 in place, which is also going to grow the plants at their optimum. Plants require CO2 to photosynthesize, and it's not really available in the aquarium in any sort of reasonable concentration unless we actively pump it in. So those are all important things. And then really defining your goal. If you want to, if your goal is to create a sustainable aquarium that you don't have to do too much work with, I would say a low light system is going to be the vibe for you. This is a high light system. Like I said, it's overdriven with energy. So a lower energy system, a lower light system is just not going to trigger massive algae blooms because there's not the energy to support it. So there's a tank behind us that is a low light system. It's against the wall there, and you can see it's quite beautiful, but it's a quieter, more somber, shadowy kind of energy versus this bright solar energy here. So it's just a different vibe, but
So
that's...
they all have CO2? All of them?
No, they don't. That one doesn't have CO2. That doesn't even really have any aquatic plants in there at the moment. It did before. It used to have moss and anubias and things like that, and those low light, slower growing plants could be a more sustainable approach. However, I would still advise getting carbon dioxide, getting the soil, all those things. So usually once I've kind of identified my goals, in this case we want a sustainable planted aquarium, I will start with the layout. I'll lay down the soil. I won't let it dry out.
How long does it last in the bag?
What's
Sorry.
that?
How long does it last in the bag? Like if you bought bags?
I'm not sure about that, but at least a year or two. I'm not, or a few years. Yeah, it doesn't really have an expiration. You just don't want to dry it out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
I bought
just,
it here a few weeks ago.
it's
I'm like,
just,
"Ah,
no. Yeah,
it's
just
gonna
don't,
dry."
just don't let it dry out. It's sealed in a plastic bag. If you were to open it, just seal it up again.
Yeah,
That's
no.
all. So then I'll arrange the hardscape, and at that point I usually want to do the planting as well. I may sit with my aquarium empty, honestly, just a blank down to the glass aquarium for quite a while till I'm inspired to set it up, because you want to do all this stuff all at once. You don't want to be interrupted, as I was when I set up this aquarium for a few months. So I'll have all the pieces of the puzzle in place. So I'll put in the substrate, arrange the hardscape, and plant. And when I plant, I will I'll add water to the point where it's just right above the substrate line. So again, it's keeping the substrate moist. And what that does, maybe like an inch or two above the substrate, I'll add water. That's keeping the substrate loose. So when I go to put my plants in, it's not going to damage them, because we're going to be planting each stem individually, singularly, and that's why we use like planting forceps. Doing that with your fingers would drive you crazy. You could maybe do chopsticks, but we have these forceps, little tweezers that we use to plant individual stem plants. So I'll just go through and plant the whole thing up. And I find I'll be more successful if I can, especially with the highlight tank, if I can pack as many plants in there as possible right from the get-go. Now this tank was started with tissue culture plants. They're like little cups of plant starts that have been grown in a sterile little laboratory environment kind of. And so many of the plants you see here came out of that. And those are surprisingly great. They're full of plant material. Each one of those little cups. There's a screen of Rotala along the back, and I've pulled out pounds of that stuff over the last year or so, and it all started from 3 little cups, 3 of those little tiny tissue culture cups. So those are really good. You're going to need carbon dioxide for them though, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Most of them are going to require carbon dioxide to grow and get started. So that's something a lot of people, especially in America, haven't fully jumped on the carbon dioxide bandwagon. That's one of the things we do here, is try to encourage people, because that's when you really can start taking off with your aquatic gardening, because plants absolutely need CO2 for photosynthesis. They can't really, they just kind of, there's a difference between thriving and surviving. So they're just kind of getting by. Now, you certainly can make a nice tank without carbon dioxide, and there are nice tanks in the store that have no CO2. However, you'll just really take it to the next level of creativity and joy when you make that investment, I find. It's like an upfront cost, and then to support it, to get the maintenance, refilling the CO2 bottle is not that expensive, actually. So, but the results are really worth it.
Times where you've kind of thought about accelerated starting, where you're you've got really good stratum, you plant the hell out of it, blast CO2, and then you're like, okay, it's at the level I want, and you pull the CO2 out and run it as a...
Yeah, I've done that. I've seen people do that, where you just use the CO2 to jumpstart the system. But there are certain plants that'll decline, and you'll start seeing things decline when you pull the CO2. If you have the CO2, there's no real reason to stop running it. But yeah, I've certainly seen that and done things like that where you just use it initially. But I find the whole system runs better longer term with CO2. So CO2 would be part of my sustainability approach, because the plants are growing really well, and they're also acting as a they're outcompeting the algae. So I'm not going to have to worry as much about manually cleaning algae or dealing with algae blooms, because the plants are growing so well, so efficiently, they're actually outcompeting the algae. So that can be an integral part of this whole idea of creating the sustainable, aquarium. So once we plant it up and we're satisfied with the plantings, then we'll fill the aquarium and get the filter running and the lights on their cycle.
What's the gap of that? Like you said, it was a couple inches. Like, is it a week or?
It's all in a few hours.
A few hours, okay.
Yeah. So you want to plant everything,
And then fill.
arrange everything, fill it all at one time. So that's what I mean. You want to make sure you have time in your schedule on your calendar to really devote to it. And also, when say you do want to start CO2, you should probably be around that for a few hours that day to observe the CO2, make sure it's dialed in. Too much CO2 is very harmful for fish. You can asphyxiate your fish, but it can even be harmful for the plants, because what's happening as you're injecting CO2, it's building up carbonic acid and your pH is dropping. And you could drop the pH so low that you just melt the plants. And I've seen people do that. And they're like, I don't understand, I have CO2, my plants look terrible. And then you realize their drop checker wasn't calibrated properly or something, and they're just pumping in way too much CO2. So
Is that something that you evaluate just by checking the pH as you're...
yeah, that is, so there's no real direct measure of CO2 concentration in the aquarium. We have to, there are approximate measures. One of them would be pH. The pH will often drop by one value during the course of the CO2 run. So that's often what people use to calibrate their CO2. There are other things, like there's a bubble counter, which just allows you to count the number of CO2 bubbles going through this little chamber, and usually like between 1 and 3 bubbles is what we're shooting for. There's also something called a drop checker, which is like another indirect measurement of CO2 that you have a pH solution in a little vial, and as that pH solution changes, it's indicating the concentration of CO2. So there's not a real great direct measure of carbon dioxide in the aquarium. I prefer to just look at the plants. That's my style. Over the years, I know that if I start with a conservative amount of CO2 and then gradually increase it over a few weeks, then I could get it to where I want it. So I'll observe the plant growth. They should register change, in terms of the CO2 within a few days. You'll start seeing the leaves will change, the new growth will look different. You'll see the changes. So you can learn a lot just by reading the plants, and that's how I prefer to do it. So I don't use drop checkers or bubble counters at all in my tanks. They're not really optimized for CO2, to be honest, but that's just my style. You know, that's the important thing to think about, or one important thing is, you know, this is a practice that should be tailored to your personality.
I feel like that's like the first question you would ask somebody, like, how much time do you have?
Yeah,
Because if you don't have
exactly.
time, if you
Yeah.
have 5 kids and a job,
Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
okay, you get a Petco 1-gallon goldfish tank.
Yeah,
Yes, there you
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Me.
Have you thought of a succulent? Maybe, you know, a cactus is more your speed.
Something that thrives on neglect.
Yeah, so, you know, that's true. Yeah, it is a time-consuming hobby. But getting back to that though, I hope that time is well spent for you. Like, it's an enjoyable thing. I do enjoy maintaining this tank. I would just like to spend a little less time doing so, where I'm not feeling like I'm forced to keep on top of it. I want to keep it enjoyable for myself. It shouldn't be another chore for you to add to your list. It should be something you look forward to, like you're working in your garden. You know, it's time for you to just zone out and create beauty with your aquarium, and that's it. That's like your only goal, and that's very satisfying. So it shouldn't be like, oh man, I gotta clean the aquarium, take out the trash. You know, it's not that kind of thing. It should be a pleasurable, hands-on activity. So you want to tailor it to your needs, and it's kind of hard to figure that out in the beginning if you don't have a lot of experience. And so yeah, these are really hard. I find, you know, it's hard to do beautiful planted aquarium, even for me, and so it's kind of hard to figure it all out. There's so much diverse streams of information out there. You're not really sure where to go with it. So yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about having a shop like this. You could come talk to our staff, myself, get ideas, and that can direct you down a nice, sustainable course from the start.
Speaking of courses, do you ever do, like, I can imagine, like, Center for Wooden Boats, they have a thing where you can go make a boat. You buy the kit, and then they teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
It seemed like, hey, have a beginner, not goldfish tank, but like, you know, entry level, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Class that goes
Gallon
along with
maybe,
it.
yeah.
Somebody buys in it for the X amount. It's probably not CO2. It's probably not super high fancy lights. But is that a
Yeah,
thing
we-
that's ever done,
Guided.
or that you
Yeah,
set up?
we do things like that. We have done things like that. I find we will do more things like that in the future. I find there are limits to how much energy I have.
I was gonna say.
You know,
And
just
it's
running
smart to know that.
running the store, catching fish, cleaning tanks. You know,
Yeah.
by the end of the day, I may not have the resources to teach another class. These tend to work out. These periodic free classes, they're free, so I can screw up. I could talk about whatever I want, and you guys aren't going to complain. Hopefully, you'll get something out of it.
Take some of
But
your
if
students
it
and
was,
just, if
yeah.
they come and do the work.
Yeah, we will do more of that in the future for sure, and we have done that in the past, definitely. But yeah, they're just kind of. If I could clone myself, maybe that would work. But that could also get weird too,
That
having a
technology
clone. Anyways, so we've started the aquarium. We've got it full of water. We have the plants planted. Now we want to make sure there's certain routines in place. So we want to make sure the lights are on a timer. That's really important right from the start. I find an 8-hour photo period works for me. That's all the tanks here you see in the store are on an 8-hour cycle. They're on timers, so we're not like thinking about turning the lights off and on, because if you do that, it'll never be consistent. And when you don't have consistency, that's when the algae steps in. Algae steps in sort of chaotic environments. You know, it grows in little puddles of water and things that are swinging in temperature and water chemistry. You know, it's one of those pioneer species that just colonizes kind of disturbed environments.
So do you change the lighting, like dial it in, sort of like everything else, and then when it's at that level, you just on and off for 8 hours?
Yeah, if you have that capacity. A lot of lights nowadays can have dimmer functions, and you could dial in the appropriate amount of light. To do that properly, you really need something called a par meter, which is a measure of light a light meter that we use in aquariums. They can be a little expensive. They're about $300, but that's the best tool in terms of dialing in your light.
You can borrow one from GSA.
Yeah, you could borrow one from the local fish club if you're a member too. Does anyone have the time? Just out of curiosity. So
15 still.
50. Okay, so we have plenty of time. Yes. Oh yes.
If you use CO2 in nanotanks, would you just use like the C-chem bottles, or would you just like do it?
That's a really good question. So injecting carbon dioxide is a pretty powerful thing that you're doing to this environment. You could asphyxiate your fish if there's too much. As I said, it's building up carbonic acid, it's changing the pH. So in a larger tank, those changes are being buffered by the sheer volume. In a tiny tank, we don't have that buffer anymore, so we have to be really on it. And I find that doesn't work with my personality. So a tank under 10 gallons in capacity will require a lot of maintenance. You know, in terms of, you'll probably have to have sodium bicarbonate every day to counterbalance the pH swings. It can be pretty challenging. It can be done. You'd be surprised, a tiny amount of CO2 will go a long way, even if it's not registering as the optimal concentration according to your drop checker or something. It still is providing some benefit to the plant growth. So one way you could get around that is just like add a little bit and see how it does, you know. But I do find they can be challenging. It's usually not a problem if you're just doing fish, but I find if you add shrimp to the equation, then I have problems with CO2 in small tanks. But yeah, there are many approaches. You could use tiny bottles. They have like little CO2 systems for nano tanks that have, there's some right behind me, that have disposable CO2 cans, and those will last about a month or two depending on how you use them. You could get a paintball can which can be refilled. You could just use a standard cylinder and just, you know, use it at a minimal rate of consumption. So there are different approaches, but yeah, the smaller the tank, the harder it is to properly manage the CO2. I usually don't do CO2 in tanks less than 10 gallons. I've just learned, for me, I've broken my heart too many times. I've had a beautiful 9-gallon aquascape with breeding crystal red shrimp, and just the whole thing crashed. You know, the shrimp all died overnight, you know, just because some kind of pH imbalance. So I've learned the hard way there. But it's up to you, you know, if it's like your one aquarium and you have a lot of time to invest in it and you enjoy tinkering, then go for it, I would say. But it will require tinkering.
Could you use those like CO2 solutions in the back? Like, could you use that as a substitute?
No, those are mismarketed. You have to be careful in the aquarium industry. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. And they market these liquid CO2. They're actually a toxin. They're a low-level biocide. I have friends, you know, I'm a former scientist. I have friends in the scientific community where they use, it's called glutaldehyde is the active ingredient, and they use it for sterilizing like fine microscopic equipment, and it's very toxic. Everyone I've talked to about glutaldehyde is like, no, you don't want to touch that stuff, go near it. And so that's what it's sold as, liquid CO2. And what it is, it's a biocide. It's killing the algae spores, and so that's allowing the plants to grow slightly more efficiently. So they're not competing with algae growing on their leaves, and so they could, you know, photosynthesize a little more efficiently. But it's not CO2 in any way. It's just been marketed that way. So you have to be careful with that. CO2 is just gas, you know, in our world. That's how we deliver it, is gas. And anyone that tells you something different is, yeah, not being honest. So you have to be careful. It's getting better. It's been, you know, I've been doing this for many, many years, and the last 10 years I've seen this whole hobby really evolve, especially in America. This has been a thing since like the 1980s in Japan and elsewhere, but Americans are kind of just now getting on the aquascaping trend. So yeah.
You mentioned fertilizer. How do you fertilize this tank?
So we have initially we have a lot of fertility in the soil, and this yeah, this brand of soil comes with slow release fertilizer tablets in the package. So initially I'm using those, but you will exhaust that fertility, especially when you have a densely planted aquarium like this. So I will add little slow release root tabs to the substrate in the zones where the plants are actively growing, and then I'm adding liquid fertilizer almost every day, and that can be a challenge. You know, there's an art to to fertilizing your aquarium.
You just have a target nitrate range?
No, I just kind of follow the stare at the tank. Yeah, that's my style. Yeah, I do. My approach is intuitive, but you can, if you want. I worked as a lab scientist for like 10 years, and I'm just done running, assays on things. For me, it's just all about intuition now, and that's fun for me. But yeah, that would be a good approach. Yeah.
I think I'm hitting that. I have a tank that's not anywhere near as bright, but it's really similar. And I actually had almost the same thing happen where I had the hardscape in, I put the soil in, and we had a leak in the kitchen, and it sat there for 2 years.
Oh wow! Oh
so
yeah.
I didn't even realize that drying it out was that bad.
Yeah.
But that would explain some things.
Yeah, it's been frustrating because I can go through. It's getting bad now. I even made it worse because I added some Coriodoris that a customer gave to me, and I wasn't thinking. I thought they were cute, and I wanted to keep them for myself, and I didn't want to sell them, so I threw them in this tank, and they're stirring up the debris even more. So since I thought about cabbing, but I just want to start over at this point. So there's these cories that are stirring up the dust, and they're making it even worse. So it's gotten worse since I added them, but live and learn.
Is that just like you're cranking out the filters more, or changing it out more frequently because
You
of
have
that?
enough.
Yeah, water changes, and honestly, what I'll do is when I do water change, I have this hooked up to a garden hose. That's how we fill all our tanks here. Is we just have a garden hose that runs to our sink, and I'll just come through with the shower attachment and blast the plants. I'm just like, I'll manually like massage, almost like, you go to the hair salon and the stylist is running her fingers through your hair and cleaning all. That's what I'm doing with the plants.
Give them a little shampoo.
Yeah, a little conditioner, and they're good to go. But it's a problem because all that dust lands, and even there's a lot of pretty good filtration on this, and that's really not enough. And then if you don't have like little shrimps and stuff grooming the leaves, the dust lands, and it's a trigger point for bacteria and algae. So some of these plants are actually pink, but they look a little dingy, and that's just because there's a very thin veneer of biofilm, which is bacteria and algae growing on their leaf surfaces. So it's not ideal, but it's not that bad either. The fish don't care. This was covered in algae; they'd still be breeding, and everything would be good for them. It's just habitat for them. However, for me, this is it's my garden, and I want it to look optimal, ideally. Also, I enjoy, just having new challenges, new ideas that I want to try. I'll be traveling to Japan, and I'll actually get to visit Takashi Yamano's headquarters and get that inspiration. So I'm sure I'll be eager to try some new things when I come back. So it's all right, it's just kind of following its natural course. If I just get out of the way a little bit and relax, then I can enjoy the process, But yeah, once you get the tank full, you got everything in place, then the clock's ticking for your next algae bloom. Is the way to look at it. And so you'll want to do regular water changes when you start out the aquarium. Like 3 or 4 times a week is not unreasonable for the first month or so. You'll really be paying attention to the plant growth. Make sure your CO2 is optimized. and just get everything sort of dialed in so you can kind of set it and forget it at that point. But yeah, that first month I'm doing a lot of water changes.
50-50 or like 25?
Yeah, about 50%. So you may not want to put fish into your brand new Aquascape for, you know, a month or so. For that reason, because you're doing these extreme water changes. The CO2 might be out of balance. You know, it might be too high. There are all these things that are challenging to the poor animals. That if you can avoid that, now if you're very skilled, you can do whatever you want. You know, I've seen people drop in animals right away, and they're very skilled. I don't do that. I like to take my time, let the plants grow in, that sort of thing, and then I will. Add the animals once I feel like the plant growth is optimized to my abilities, to my goals. And then we watch the plants grow basically, and then we may add our animals, and we start our trimming. You know, trimming is an important way of how we maintain the aquarium, and that's a subject of its own. But initially it's really getting all those life support system variables in place and optimized, and water changes are really important in that first month. I can't overemphasize that. Keep your lights on a timer, it's really important too. Deeply consider getting carbon dioxide. Even on a low light system that we talked about earlier, the CO2 will help things. Plants, it just brings the plants to their full potential. They just look beautiful. Even a low light, you know, a low light system full of like cryptocorns and nubias and mosses will look gorgeous, you know, with the addition of CO2. Whereas they'll kind of look like they're struggling, a little rough around the edges without the CO2. So it's just, you know, it's really, again, having that initial goal in the beginning. What do you really want to accomplish with the aquarium? Have that really well defined. It could just be one thing. Like for me, the red fish and the pink plant, those are my goals. Tailoring all my decisions around those two variables was important. So if your goal is I don't really want to spend that much time cleaning my fish tank, I'm very busy, consider like the low light system, you know, go down that path. And that could be really sustainable. So, any other questions? Yeah, thanks for your attention, everyone. Thanks for coming. We do these periodically, and it's kind of we announce them on I'm sure you found us through Instagram or email list, and that's usually where I announce them. So we'll probably do like one more before I leave for my trip, and then start again in the summer. So thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you.